Very smart. And in China, the journalists are part of the state. They've been, they're part of the government in many ways. And so they know how to navigate that kind of tricky path between keeping the government happy and also reporting the news. And environmental journalists in China have really been pushing the envelope. So that is why. So people who come to the China Environment Forum kind of wondering that I only have one Chinese person up here today. This is kind of strange. Because it's not just a China Environment Forum meeting. It's with the Environmental Change and Security Program, Asia Program, and the Internews Earth Journalism Network. And when we were approached by that guy way at the end, James Fan, there, troublemaker, who's a journalist, he said, I got a bunch of Asian green journalists. And I leapt at the opportunity in great part because I know from the dynamism I've seen in China, and China is increasingly impacting the region. And so I thought this would be a great opportunity, totally selfish, James, that I could get to know some movers and shakers in the journalist world in Asia. But he's traveling around with a gaggle of journalists, not just from Asia, but from other parts of the world. And I'm going to pass it over to James there to tell you why in the world he's got this crowd of green journalists following him around here in D.C. And then what we're going to do is we're kind of having it's a casual Friday, right? We're going to have these people, they're going to tell you, talk a little bit about themselves, about, and maybe they're... See, I can call you guys movers and shakers, and maybe you'd be a little bit too modest too, but they are movers and shakers, going to talk about their work and maybe some kind of the challenges and opportunities that they've created in getting the word out on environmental challenges in Asia and probably catalyzing action. So, James, you're the man in the know. Tell us about these folks.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. It's great to be here. Thanks for sharing your Friday morning with us. As Jennifer mentioned, I am the director of Internews' Earth Journalism Network. I'm also a journalist myself. I've spent the bulk of my career in Asia, mostly Southeast Asia, covering environmental issues. But beginning in 2004, I joined with Internews, and we established the Earth Journalism Network with the mission of supporting journalists around the world to help them cover environmental issues, improve the effectiveness of environmental coverage. We are not an advocacy organization. I'm going to sound like Ma Jun. We are a journalist organization. Some of our partners, I guess, practice advocacy journalism, you could say, but we are not WWF, Greenpeace. If you like, we do have two advocacy positions. We support a free and open press, and we support more and better environmental coverage. That's the extent that we go. We're not a traditional broadcast network either. We're not a news agency. I like to describe us as three networks in one, if you like. We're a network of individual journalists. We've trained over 2,000 journalists around the world, and those journalists have produced over 3,500 stories about the environment. We have an active listserv with over 1,000 members communicating daily. We're also a network of institutions, so we have dozens of partners working with us. That can be professional associations of journalists in various countries. It can be environmental news sites or mainstream media organizations. Think of us in some ways as a network of networks. And finally, we're also part of Internews Network, which is a global media development organization. We work in dozens of countries. And being part of Internews allows us to raise funds, manage projects, and tap into the wealth of expertise and staff that Internews can offer. So what kind of projects do we run? Why are we all here for this week? Again, let me break it out into three categories. First is capacity building. We do a lot of training and fellowships. We work with journalists to give them the latest news, the information on what climate change is, what is the science behind it, and not just climate change, biodiversity, water issues, forestry, fisheries, environmental health. And we also help provide them with reporting skills so they can produce stories that are both accurate, informative, and engaging to the audience, and produce in a way that the audience, the public, can understand. Second thing we do is content production. Okay, we don't produce news ourselves, but we support the production of news for local media. Okay, and that's important distinction again from a regular news agency. We support a bunch of innovative projects working with digital media to help get stories out. For instance, we're creating an interactive map of the Amazon region that will collate stories from all around the region, and you can see what's happening in different parts of the Amazon. We worked at Lisan's going to talk about the online toolkit he's created. But why do we work with local media? We think there are advantages with this approach as opposed to, say, working with NGO communications campaign in several ways. First of all, the media has a broader reach than, say, than an advocacy campaign. It has, if you like, more legitimacy. The way you view a story in a newspaper tends to differ quite a bit from what you might see in an NGO brochure. And finally, the audience is different. Often with a communications campaign, you tend to be preaching to converted. Well, if you're working with the mainstream media, you have a more diverse audience, and you're exposing, hopefully, many people who might not share the same views as you. And these projects have had real-world impacts. In Southeast Asia, for instance, our journalists uncovered a wildlife smuggling ring that was capturing wild macaques in Cambodia, smuggling them into Vietnam, and then exporting them to the U.S. and China for medical experiments. Another group of journalists in Vietnam went to a national park called Tam Dao National Park in the north, one of the few remaining nice forests in the north. And there they discovered that the local authorities were planning an ecotourism project that was going to include a golf course and a casino in the park. So I guess it was going to be an eco-casino, right? Yeah. Well, the journalists wrote up the story, and immediately the Vietnamese government stepped in, and eventually they scrapped the project. So think about it. You're a young journalist in Vietnam, you've written this one story, you have this tremendous impact on the policy of your country. Finally, the final group of projects that we're involved in is institution building. When I was a journalist in Thailand, one of the things I did is help set up the Thai Society of Environmental Journalists. This proved to be a very useful organization. We had a lot of peer-to-peer learning. So the senior journalists would train younger ones, whether through seminars or just over dinner. But most importantly, it gave us clout. So I, as an individual journalist, when I wanted to interview the Minister of Industry to ask why the oil companies are dumping mercury in the Gulf of Thailand, he would ignore me. But when a whole group of us representing most of the country's media made that request, you better believe he came and talked to us. So when we set up the Earth Journalism Network, we said, let's work with these local networks where they exist and help build them where they don't exist. And that's sort of what we've done. And Adi, for instance, is going to talk to you about the Society of Indonesian Environmental Journalists. But before I introduce our speakers, I just want to point out that we have, in addition to the 4 speakers up here on the panel, we have 8 other of our key partners from around the world. If you could please stand up, members, so you can see who they are from.
Yay. I thought you were going to have them doing the wave in the front row there, but that's
we can still do that.
And where are they from? We have the bios here.
The bios are in the documents. You're certainly encouraged to approach them and talk with them afterwards. But let me now turn it over to our panel, and I'll briefly introduce them just because, again, you have their backgrounds on your documents. To my right is IGG Maha Adi. It's easier if you just call him Adi. He's from Indonesia, from Bali originally, correct? Yes, and is a long-time reporter. Has been a reporter for over 15 years, working for magazines like National Geographic Indonesia and Tempo. He's now the director of the Society of Indonesian Environmental Journalists. Welcome, Adi. To his right is Joydeep Gupta, another long-standing journalist from India, based in New Delhi. He was for many years a reporter and editor for the Indo-Asian News Agency, which is the largest private Indian news agency. He has now morphed his career to become the director of the Third Pole Project, which operates the Third Pole website, where you can find out all sorts of fascinating, you get lots of stories on climate change and other environment-related issues in the Himalayan region, and he'll be talking more about his work. To his right is Imelda Abano, a reporter from the Philippines who writes for the Business Mirror newspaper. And in 2010, she formed the Philippine Network of Environmental Journalists and has been really tremendously active in working with journalists in her country to improve their reporting. And finally, to her right is Lisan Liu, or Liu Lisan. Lisan is our representative in China. He manages EJN projects in China. He works for our representative of the Internews's representative in China. It's called the International Center for Communications Development. Actually, he wears several hats. He's also now working with Green Innovation Hub, working on a series of innovative water projects in China. But now I'm going to turn it over to them and let them talk for themselves. I thought we'd start off with Joydeep as kind of our senior member. Joydeep, can you tell us a bit about your work?
And he won the arm wrestling race contest beforehand.
Well, thanks for rightly identifying me as a dinosaur. Thank you. Well, okay. The third pole is, as most of you would know, is the entire Himalayan range. And it's called the third pole because after the north and the south poles, it's got the maximum amount of fresh water locked in it, which makes it a very vital place. That's why it's also called the water tower of Asia, because all of China, most of South Asia, much of Southeast and Central Asia depend on this. So we look at all the ecological issues in this entire region, which gives us a much larger remit than we can usually handle, because it's a huge area and huge population. But we try our best. We do it in an aggressively international rather than a narrow national point of view, because we are working in an area which has a history of not conflict, but disputes over transboundary water, transboundary rivers, over water sharing. We are very aggressive in promoting open conversation on these issues, on water sharing between India and Pakistan, between China, India, Bangladesh and Bhutan, between China and the rest of the countries in the lower Mekong region, between Tajikistan and Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan, over the Sindh Darya and Amu Darya basins. These are all very conflict-prone and risky basins. And we work in this area with journalists, with NGOs, with academics, with policymakers, and we work aggressively to promote open conversation in a way to promote cooperation. We work on the premise that if you get people to talk, then they don't fight. And we get them to talk openly on these issues. We work as catalysts there. We cover the area, and we train environmental journalists in this entire region on how to report better on the environment on the basis of the science. We put them in touch with scientists, with experts, with resource persons all over the world. That's what we do. Thank you.
Adi.
Okay. Thank you, James. Our association, the Society of Indonesia Environmental Journalists, initially founded by 5 journalists in 2006. And then with help from IJN, we invite 45 journalists to declare it in the Mount Leusser, Aceh. And since then, our member growing. By December last year, we have more than 250 journalist member. All are journalists, regular or freelance journalists. And our activity is still focused on capacity buildings, like such as trainings, workshop, regular discussion, environmental discussion with the Ministry of Environmental in Indonesia, and provide fellowship to Indonesian journalists. So, most of our funding comes from both international and national donor. We work very close to the international NGO who operated in Indonesia, like WWF, the Nature Conservancy, Conservation International, Flora Fauna International, and so on. And because Indonesia is a big country, with large areas, since 2 years ago we had 9 local coordinators, so who work voluntarily, of course. They are usually elected by local members, and serve as a bridge between local member and Jakarta office. And what big challenge we face, maybe as here in the United States, the political issue and economic issue are the two main issues dominating the media headline in Indonesia. It's still very difficult to for environmental issue becomes headline in Indonesia unless some extraordinary events happens, such as floods, forest fire, mud flow disaster in East Java. That's all I think. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Adi. Imelda?
Good morning. I'm Imelda. I'm the president of the Philippine Network of
Can you
Environmental.
pull that mic a little
sorry.
closer there? There you go.
It's good to be in DC, but way back home in the Philippines, Philippines is not safe with climate change, disasters happening all around, flooding everywhere. We are visited by 20 typhoons a year. Name the natural disasters, we have it. So what we do with our group is that with the support of the EJN, we form this PNEJ so that we have to address environmental issues by empowering local journalists to increase their accuracy, intensity of their reporting, and we aim to see ourselves as communication link of these critical environmental issues. And some of the challenges that we face in our country is that environmental issues are seen as a very minor concern in the country, despite that we are on the top list of natural disasters in the world, and yet we are not in the top 40 recipient of humanitarian aid. That's just for example. And environmental reporters are most often silenced or even killed on reporting controversial environmental issues such as illegal logging, mining, and the environmental journalism is still lagging behind other bit reporting or specialism, and we want to fill this gap. That's why we are trying our best to have capacity building, institutional, organizational building in the Philippines.
Thank you, Imelda. Litan?
Good morning. Thank you, Jennifer and James, for having me here. Glad to meet you all. EJN, together with ICCD, the Internews China's office, have focused on capacity building in China for many years, actually, at least for 5 to 6 years. There, we have held a lot of salons, workshops, trainings in different cities in China. Generally, we trained about 300 journalists or personnel in the recent years, and they produced more than 400 articles afterwards. We also developed a environmental health and climate change toolkit, online toolkit, in English and in Chinese to international journalists and to Chinese journalists. We put it online. You can check it if you are interested. There's one English one on the EJN's website. There is another Chinese EJN website in China. It's all about Chinese languages. This toolkit covers environmental health and climate change topics. We have more than 60 topics and these two fields. For each topic, we have introduction, case studies, resources, critics, discussions, all about this topic. Basically, we want to let journalists know more about each topic and environmental health and climate change. Many Chinese journalists, especially young journalists, are from journalism school or from the Chinese department. They have no scientific background. But in terms of reporting environment and climate change, it requires a lot of scientific knowledge. So we developed such online toolkits to help them better report, better cover those stories. Well, if found available, we will develop more toolkits. For example, we are planning to develop a new one about timber fair trade between China, Africa, and between China and Europe and the United States. We also have plans to do more on those capacity building issues in China. My another work is in Green Innovation Hub. I think Jennifer knows my boss a lot. We are a new founded Chinese environmental organization. I'm the manager of the water team. Our project is called a glass of clean water. We aim to provide safe drinking water solution to rural China. Well, China is much richer now in the recent decades, but there's still a large population of Chinese, especially in villages, who cannot access to clean, safe drinking water. So we're trying to do something to help solve this problem. But it's still in the beginning, and trying to find ways and approaches and technologies and all kind of resources to do that. Okay, thank you.
Okay, good. Lican, your work also with ICCD in China has had some real world impacts as well. Do you want to talk, for instance, about one of the reporters we trained, Zhang Ke, and his work?
Yeah, Zhang Ke, James mentioned, is actually a ICCD or EJN fellow several years ago. He got trained by EJN workshop. He is a senior journalist from one of Chinese mainstream business newspaper.
Which paper?
The number first business daily or something.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know the exact English name, but it's something like that. He's based in Beijing. Several years ago, he and some other a group of Chinese central officials and journalists went to a city called Liupanshui in Guizhou province, southwest China, to do some field investigation on the environmental situation, pollution, business development, something. There is one deputy mayor of that city told this group, saying that we have no any coal chemistry factory in our city, and we have no any factories near the drinking water sources in the city. Well, what people can say, people just stay a while and go. But Zhang Ke has some local contacts who have told him that it's a lie, and after the group moved on, he went back to the city and to he got the evidence that there's actually many coal chemistry factories in the city, and there are many factories around the drinking water sources. And he reported the results are Zhang Ke was awarded by the MEP, the deputy minister of MEP, because of this reporting. And the mayor who told the lie was fired. Ooh. It turns out that
seriously?
Yeah,
wow.
seriously.
That hardly happened.
Right after the reporting,
wow.
He was fired. It turns out that the media or the journalists can do a lot. I mean, sometimes we feel that we just report, but sometimes we can put a real influence on the event, even on politics. Yeah.
Thank you, Lican. Adi, your group also, I think, has had some impacts in, for instance, Southeast Sulawesi. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Our success story. Okay. Yeah. I think the sad story is we achieve only small success in terms of change behavior, maybe change the government policy on the environmental. For example, what I can say is what happened in Central Java when one of our fellow covered the impact of climate change to the north coastline of Central Java. And then, which is very destructive to the people and village along the coastlines. And after the stories appear in one of the major newspapers in Central Java, the local government decided to improve the wave barrier in the north coast. And then we also use social media, Facebook, to hold information from many stakeholders, not just our member, but also from NGO. Mostly a member of our group in Facebook is come from NGO activists. One of the NGO activists reported about the damage of a tripa swamp forest in Aceh, and then within a few days, the REDD task force announced that the damage was by the company was violated the law. Yes, I think this. Yeah.
Thank you. Joydeep, do you want to talk a little more detail about some of your activities, particularly around river basins and how you brought together journalists around the Brahmaputra, the Indus? Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, the Brahmaputra one was recent, last October, and very interesting because we had been thinking about it for quite some time, because what happens with monotonous regularity in the Indian media is that you keep getting stories that, oh, China is diverting all the waters of the Brahmaputra to North China, and most of Northeast India is going to go totally dry. So we started looking at, okay, now, is this happening? Does China have such a plan? We all know that China has had for centuries a plan of its Eastern Canal, Central Canal, Western Canal. What stage is it at? Is it happening? So we thought of this idea that let's bring journalists from China, India, and Bangladesh together to discuss this, because Bangladesh is the country which the Brahmaputra finally falls into the sea. And Bangladesh media always complains that between China and India, all the water is being taken away by the time it reaches Bangladesh. So we did, and bring all the experts to talk to them, which is what we did last October. It's a sort of reflection on the state of distrust between these countries on these issues that we had to find a fourth country in which to hold this. Yeah.
Which was?
Which was Nepal.
Okay.
Because that was the nearest and the cheapest place to do it. The Indian government wouldn't give visas to Chinese journalists to go to Northeast India. The Chinese government wouldn't give visas to Indian journalists to go to Tibet. So we ended up in Kathmandu. And neither would give visas to Bangladeshi journalists to go anywhere. So this is part of what we try to do, try to get rid of this whole business of distrust, mistrust, through talking openly. And it helped. If anybody is interested enough in the subject, I can share the various articles that came out as a result of that conference, and the experts explaining in great detail to all the journalists as to exactly what the plans are, what's a run-of-the-river project that China is planning in Tibet, that's actually China's building in Tibet, what are the run-of-the-river projects that India is building on that river, and what's happening in Bangladesh as a result of all this, what's projected to happen. I found that as far as the Indian journalists were concerned, they were very happy, because what happens on the northern slopes of the Himalayas they simply don't get to know. And what was more of a surprise to me was that I found that good environmental journalists from Beijing also do not know what's happening on the northern slopes of the Himalayas. It came from when Chinese experts from Chengdu, who have been working in this area, spoke to the group. Yeah. It came to the Chinese journalists as much of a surprise as it came to the Indian journalists. So I think there is a huge space to do this. Sit down, talk it over. We have done it in the past over the Indus, India and Pakistan. In the next few months, we are going to again do it over the Indus. We are going to
You didn't fix it yet, huh?
We are not going to fix it in a hurry. But what we are going to do is to take a group of Indian reporters to the upper reaches of the Indus in India, and a group of Pakistani reporters to the upper reaches of the Indus in Pakistan. We can't take them to the field for this, exactly the same reason. They won't be given visas. But let them go to contiguous areas of that basin, do their stories, and then compare stories and discuss the issue. That's the immediate next plan, yes. We keep doing this.
Could I follow up on that with the Brahmaputra? Because I need to go and read more. I get so busy. I'm a good buddy with Isabel Hilton when she first had the idea, because she said the journalists don't. Isabel Hilton's the founder of China Dialogue. So there's always a China connection. I can find a China connection with all these folks here probably. And that when you guys were talking about the Western Canal, I mean, when we did work, I hang out with journalists too, the Circle of Blue folks, and we interviewed the chief engineer of the South North Water Transfer Project, who I thought that project was dead, but then he said, no. We really need to divert that water, which is, we're taking it from the Brahmaputra, to send it to northwest China to get at the coal, because we don't have enough water for coal. and that's what we discovered, and everyone thought it's kind of crazy, like what? But their coal desire, did that come out in your talks, in your
Yes.
discussions too? That, and because I found that in China that even a lot of Chinese water officials didn't know like why they were building it, that it was to get at the coal.
Yeah, it's. I think, as far as I understand, the Chinese government hasn't decided either way whether they're going to build that do anything about the diversion of the Brahmaputra water to northwest China, to the northern slopes of the Xinjiang plateau, or not. That's my understanding, and it's also my understanding that there is a huge debate going on among the official circles within China on whether this should be done or not be done. Periodically we keep hearing that this project is being resurrected. So I don't know what the Chinese government will finally do. We don't know. But I do believe that it helps if the Chinese journalists, especially, and also other journalists, have a better idea of what the debate is. The third pole is a joint project of the Earth Journalism Network and China Dialogue. So all our articles are actually in both languages, English and Chinese. So when all our articles in this subject in Chinese, I find, get a very large number of comments over the net from Chinese readers. And I can see that there is a huge debate going on in China on this.
Thank you, Joydeep. Imelda, you've been doing some pretty innovative, groundbreaking work in the Philippines, especially in some of the provinces that are most at risk from climate change, working with the local government officials to help raise awareness about that. You want to talk about that work?
Yeah. So since we started this group, we worked with the local government officials, the indigenous people, civil society, women, and the children at the grassroots level. So one of the impacts of resonating the problems or environmental challenges that people face, the local government unit face in the Philippines, is that our group signed a media declaration to mainstream and raise a public awareness on climate change adaptation with the Philippine president just a month after he signed the climate change action plan of the country. So it's one of the greatest impact that our group made in the Philippines. And another thing is that with this connection with local government units, people at the grassroots level, what we do now is that we're launching this international environmental reporting, which is supported by the IWMF, which is the DC-based IWMF. So we are kind of developing, strengthening environmental journalists to do an in-depth reporting on environmental issues affecting in the Philippines for a year. So and the IWMS is here to support us. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Maybe we can throw it open now to the audience.
We could throw it up with some questions, but James and I could interrupt if you guys aren't. But I think you're pretty dynamic. Helen, of course, hands up. Devin, can you grab the mic? And so, yeah, and when you get the mic, if you just say who you are and where you hang out. And then Ruth. Oh, it's on the very bottom.
Thanks. I'm Helen Rafael. I worked for 2 years in Chengdu and also 2 years in Kota Makassar, Sulawesi. Selamat datang. So my question is for both Liu Xiancheng and Tuan Adi, and it's not about water, it's about logging. China prides itself on reforestation, especially in the Northwest, planting so many trees, but it imports a huge amount of logs from illegally logged products from Indonesia. So I wonder if you can tell me about your knowledge of the illegal logging in Indonesia and what's happening now. What's the latest?
And maybe what your journalists are doing about it.
Adi?
Yeah, okay. There are three major environmental problem in Indonesia nowadays. Like first is impact of climate change, and then forest problem, and the last is marines. Because most of our people depends on this quality and quantity of resources, forest, marine, and then for illegal logging case, it still happen in Indonesia. We identify SCAJ this year launch a fellowship to cover illegal logging, in-depth reporting on illegal logging. We identify at least 15 provinces as the source of illegal timber. So we hope that the story that we will produce from this fellowship will help to change the policy from governments, especially to local government, because there were some radical changes in the political situation in Indonesia the last 12 years. It's more decentralization is the key issue. So local government has more power to do more things, including the endorse or the environmental policy. So I think now I cannot give you the exact number, how volume the illegal logging from illegal timber from Indonesia, but I think in next 6 months after our fellowship is finished, maybe we can get the more exact number from the illegal timber and logging.
I would just add, if I could, Internews is involved in another project in Kalimantan, working with a friend of Adi's and mine, named Hari Suryadi, who's actually one of the founders of SIEJ and another longtime journalist. And he's been setting up an SMS network, text messaging network among the Dayak people in Kalimantan. And the idea is that if you can create a kind of local network of text messengers acting almost like journalists, they can monitor what's going on in the forest. And when they spot a case of illegal logging or encroachment by a palm oil plantation, they can tell all their friends by text message. And we have an arrangement with a local news station, Ruai TV, that can pick up the news and report it. So the idea is to kind of really use new but relatively simple technology to create a kind of forest monitoring and reporting network, if you like. It's still very much in the pilot stage, but it's pretty interesting to see how these technologies can be used towards that end. Yeah.
I was curious with the text messaging, because I heard a similar story. Someone was telling me a similar story that was going on somewhere on the African continent, but the challenge sometimes that they got a deal that the people that would text these messages in could do it for free.
Right. That is a big problem. It costs money to send text, and of course, if you have a big network, if you're sending it to 300 people, I think you actually pay to each person.
Yeah.
We're also exploring another technology called interactive voice response, IVR, and there the idea is, if you have a report, you call into a central phone number, and you leave a message, basically a voicemail, saying what's going on, and everyone gets an alert that this voice message has been left, and then for those who are interested, they can call in and get the message. So we're trying to find cost-effective ways to do this. The other problem with this that we found, actually quite ironically, is that sometimes the content is not very good. I mean, you'd think it's pretty simple to send a text message, but it's actually, you need still to make the information coherent and engaging. And so it's just like with everything else, you need good content. And so part of the project is teaching the citizen journalists how to, send good messages or create good content. In effect, making them semi-professional journalists, if you like, because they're no longer amateurs. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the South Sulawesi, especially Makassar, I can say that the South Sulawesi is not, based on our research, is not one of the illegal timber sources. It's like a transit port for illegal timber that come from another province like Southeast Sulawesi and Central Sulawesi.
But maybe she'd ask too, because that timber that's illegally harvested,
Yeah.
I wonder where it goes. It goes to China, where it's processed,
Yeah.
and then we buy it in our local.
And finally, the products goes to Europe and the US.
Yeah, I'm going shopping this week. Yeah, so and our paper.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about, because you mentioned that you're starting a project,
Yeah.
and this was with the journalist project. Yeah, because you were doing water.
Yeah,
Innovation
it's a journalist product. But in terms of illegal logging, I have no concrete or exact number, how many years. I didn't see a lot of discussion on Chinese media about illegal logging. Obviously, it's not a big problem for Chinese, I think. But in another way, you can see that those Chinese companies are destroying their own forests in China, actually. They replace those fast-growing species of trees for the paper-making factories or furniture factories or something. But it's a big problem in China and outside China. But I really don't know how those companies can do that in Indonesia or in Africa and to import those timber to China. It should be a lot of issues happening in that circle.
I mean, there has been the WWF and the Forestry Stewardship Council and some other organizations I know have, they started about 8 years ago working in Beijing to try to create these sustainable forest certifications, but it's not regional yet. But that's the kind of topic, that's why I was excited. So I guess we have to bring him back later, but that's the kind of thing that'll be interesting to see, because a lot of people have said that because the issue is not really on the minds of the Chinese citizens, because ultimately, while right now we're consuming a good hunk of the timber that you guys are getting in, Chinese consumers, they're increasing their amount. So, all right, stay tuned. Okay, got Ruth, because she was very patient, and then we'll move up the side, and then we'll go back to this side if they're obedient. Okay, Ruth.
This is really interesting. It wasn't my question, but on the texting, there was a campaign in Manila a few years ago involving air pollution in Manila that involved text, people sending messages. I don't know how that turned out. I didn't follow it, but it's a nice model. And there's a lot of stuff now on crowdsourcing sort of tools that can be used to capture a lot of that and make it really meaningful. My question actually was, I was hoping, I'm Ruth Bell, I'm with the Wilson Center. I was hoping that all of you might address process issues. I mean, you come from a range of countries where, on the one side there's a quite open press, and on the other, press is a little bit more constricted. And I'm curious how you develop sources, how you think about, how far you can go in terms of pushing an issue given the sort of political climate that surrounds it, and talk a little bit about that, because it's a really interesting problem as you develop your tools and things as environmental reporters. And environment, as we just discussed in the logging issue, often pushes up against very powerful and entrenched powers in society. Thanks.
So who wants to attack the answer first? Judy?
Okay.
I volunteered you.
Thank you. Apart from China, all the other countries in this area we're talking about have a more or less free media, where the only censorship is probably self-censorship or the owner's censorship, which applies to any country in the world. China, of course, has its own unique situation, but I must say, I have been working with and doing joint reports with environmental journalists in China since the Three Gorges days. And those are the people who have been pushing the envelope, as Jennifer pointed out, more than just about anybody else. And I think they have been at the forefront of opening up the Chinese media space. the environmental journalists of China. They really are admirable people. They've been very brave people who have been doing a lot of good work. But on the question of how to develop sources, as far as sources in bureaucracies go, as far as sources in official places go, we don't have any magic bullet there. It's the old journalistic techniques of making your own sources. However, increasingly in this day of the internet, in this age of the internet, there is a huge amount of information available, which does not require unnamed sources telling you something. And that is something we, through our many programs of training people, we make that available. We make journalists aware of where those sources are, where the resource persons are. If you are trying to do a story on the Three Gorges, who can you send a mail to? And who's the credible guy, the expert from Chinese Academy of Sciences who will answer your mail? That's the service we provide all the time for journalists all over. I think Lisan does the same thing, so maybe I think he will add to that.
Yeah, actually, I have not much to add. Actually, I agree with Jyoti that those Chinese environmental journalists are very brave. If you read Chinese, or you can read on China Dialogue, they have English versions. They can generally report everything you can imagine on environmental issues. They criticize the MEP directly. They criticize China's environmental policy in the trade policy. Of course, they face a lot of censorship. Censorship is always there. Everyone knows. But while censorship is alive, they find ways to avoid it or to live with it. There are many Chinese media now have a green section on their own newspaper or TV channels, which means that they want to emphasize those sustainable development in China, whatever it is, or they want to promote those environmentally friendly policy in China. But of course, media is media. I mean, what they can do more? I mean, they report, they give better stories. I think that's good enough for money, to some extent, for them to cover all kind of environmental scandals or even environmental related political scandals. I think that they did a lot to try to address the real problem in China and to try to find ways to help solving those problems.
If I may add, since you mentioned the Philippines in Manila, we are actually the #1 texting capital of the whole world. So whether it's a bad news or good news, like for example, we toppled the president just using a text messages. We stopped big corporations in cutting down trees because of text messages, social media, Facebook. But Philippines is also one of the freest. We have one of the freest press in the whole Asia, but it has a price on it. More journalists are being killed because of writing controversial issues, mining, illegal logging. So what we are trying to do is that we capacitate, empower local journalists, and train them with, for example, safety issues.
I often remark, and I notice in countries where there is restrictive press censorship, there's often a tension between the central government and the local government. So, for instance, that example I gave in Vietnam, you had the local authorities which were implementing a destructive project. In fact, the central government, they probably didn't even know about it, or didn't know enough about it. And once it was brought to their attention, they kind of cracked down. And I think it was a similar dynamic in the story that Li Zan mentioned in China. You have the central authorities, which, I mean, we've heard of high-ranking Chinese government officials asking Chinese press to report more on the environment. But the problem often comes with the local government officials who are actually implementing the projects that are often poorly thought out or are damaging, and they're the ones where you get a lot of the roadblocks. And also, I know Lisan has talked about this in the past, maybe you can mention again, is when there is a disaster, for instance, in China, often you can report on it for a few days freely, and then you have to stop.
And then the propaganda office says, Gola,
Yeah.
enough.
Enough.
It's enough.
Actually, I'll give you an example. In last month, there's a environmental reporting award actually held by China Dialogue.
Yeah.
One of the local media got one of the awards is Yunnan Province Information Messenger or Daily something, because of its reporting on a chemical residual or something environmental scandal. Why they get this award is because that local media in China extremely difficult to report their own environmental issues in their own region. I mean, in the provinces or in the city, but they managed to cover their story before the propaganda department issued any prohibition. That's really impressive to all the journalists in China. So that's why they got the award. And they always find a way to do something.
I mean, I've been impressed with the talent of a lot of these journalists, but and I know that you guys are doing this toolkits and capacity building of existing journalists. And I don't. Are there any in the journalism schools in your countries? Is there any environmental journalism training? I hear every now and then, like in China, like someone teaches one course. Is that going to be an object that where you want to go, get them before they're out of school?
Yeah, if we have money, I mean. I talked with Philip, the ICCD head, and James several years ago to see that whether it's good we can have some kind of environmental journalism course, at least in one or two Chinese universities. It's not easy, actually. It's need a lot of resources. And the thing is that environmental reporting is pretty, I'm not saying new, but pretty new in China. There's not a lot of scholars who do research on environmental reporting, and there are a lot of environmental journalists in China now. Hopefully, in the next several years, you can see more and more students who found that environmental reporting is actually an interesting field that they can devote themselves into this field. But I never heard that in any Chinese university there's a environmental reporting course or something.
I see a project that could
they have something. We had a workshop in the Shanghai Communication University to train students and the journalists there. Yeah.
And how about in India?
I actually do pro bono teaching once a week of development journalism, which definitely includes environment journalism in a very big way, in one of the large universities in New Delhi, and at the Mass Communication Research Center there for postgraduate students. Yes, environment journalism, or rather development journalism overall, is at least an offered elective at the postgraduate journalism school level in the good universities that have postgraduate journalism courses in India. It's not usually a compulsory subject, but there is not zero interest. I mean, I have, in a batch of 21, I have 8 students, so that gives you an idea of how many choose this.
Okay. Yeah.
Just last year, in the Philippines, we launched this climate change academy where they train local government units, local government officials in this academy, and our group partnered with them for them to learn how environmental media works and how we cover environmental issues.
That's cool. So they'll take your interviews then, right? Yeah?
Can I add?
Yeah, please.
In terms of environmental journalism school, I think the best way for journalists is to get scholarship or fellowship and send some journalists to a good university to learn about ecology, because the foundation of ecology is a basic science to be a good environmental journalist. I think like what has been done by the Nieman in Harvard University or Knight Foundation in MIT is the best way to increase the capacity of environmental journalists.
Okay, I'm going to share them with you now. We had some questions. Okay, let's take this one. How about I gather 2 questions real quick from him? And first, here's the mic, yeah.
I'm Dr. Sam Hancock of Emerald Planet TV. And Jennifer and James, thank you for putting this on. It's good to see all the journalists here. But I want to go on the 180 degrees from this. We're the good news folks. We cover 532 stations in the U.S. and all the countries abroad. And so how do we collaborate with you as far as highlighting the best practices that are going on in your country, but also allow you to share your voice from what's going on? It's just like working with James and talking about Internews and with Woodrow Wilson Center. You really are a best practice in yourselves. And so that's something that we would like to explore with you. But thank you for being here and sharing. And thanks again to James and Jennifer.
James, did you have a comment to make, or
thank you, Sam, for the comments and for your for your remarks. I mean, it's interesting. Your approach is to focus on the good news, and that's something that we often like to stress ourselves. Is that, it's very easy when you're covering the environment to be all gloom and doom, and that usually isn't very effective when trying to engage the attention of an audience. So. I think something we all try and do, all our members, is report on solutions as well as problems, and that's not always easy because as we've been discussing before, there's an old saying in journalism: if it bleeds, it leads. So, but it is crucial we all agree to report on the positive side as well.
Yeah. Can we have a question right in front there? And grab the mic if you don't mind, and tell us who you are.
My name is Dr. Claire Williams. I work for the Forest History Society in Durham. It's a Duke affiliate. And we're really interested in the international illegal logging question. And I wanted to point out that Indonesia, I think, was put under the spotlight in Bali. And at that time, the science community and the policy community in Europe and U.S. had a completely different take on what was causing illegal logging. And I want to get your take in terms of whether you see this as true or not. The sort of the mantra of what's taught to students in classes and graduate students who will be negotiators is that it's Indonesia has an oversupply of pulp mills, that pulp mills were funded by the World Bank, that the World Bank's funding for pulp mills created the deficit in raw materials, and that this has become so entrenched that illegal logging now has a tax. It's taxed. It's part of the municipal revenues that flow into the towns near the borders where the logs come. And the third part is that there's a very large illegal logging project at the DNA level that's being done in China universities, in Germany, in the U.S., where the DNA forensics are easily accessible. And it's generated a really interesting science article where someone went into an antique store, took a sample of a bed frame and traced it all the way back to a particular log in Indonesia. And the last point that came from this is it's the diptocarps in Indonesia, and they're largely gone. The last 10 years, they're gone. They're not replaceable. It's kind of like losing the redwoods. And they're being replaced by oil palm. So I just wondered how your text and their messaging where it falls in the spectrum, if it's true, and if what I've said isn't true, it'd be useful to know. Thanks.
Okay, I don't know about this information, the oversupply of pulp that funded by World Bank, but I think the poverty is a major why illegal logging still happen in Indonesia, because it's I think poverty. And then last year we held some fellowship to forest certification to the journalists in Indonesia, and only some area in Java endorsed this forest certification. That's why the area outside Java, the illegal logging still happen, like in Papua. in Aceh still happen because the local government don't intend to implement this forest certification. Why? Because as you said, that illegal logging is a source of local tax for the local government. So that's all I know about this topic. I think, yeah.
I would just add that there are many drivers to illegal logging in Indonesia and other countries, and certainly one of the most one of the biggest ones these days is the expansion of palm oil plantations. And that when we talk to journalists and other people in Indonesia, they often cite that. And there's so it's not just the market for pulp and paper; it's the market for palm oil, which is very lucrative and growing. And there are many different ways you can address that. And in terms of our text messaging project, one way it sort of addresses it is, according to my understanding of, all these palm oil plantations, there's supposed to be an agreement, or at least in this area of Kalimantan where we're working, there's supposed to be an agreement where they set aside at least 10% of their land and agree not to clear it and leave it as forest, from what I understand. And now, as you can imagine, in practice, they don't always respect that agreement, the palm oil companies. So one of the things this project we're doing is, working with the local population to kind of monitor that and make sure. So it's kind of a grassroots enforcement mechanism, or at least a monitoring effort. And that is something they're supposed to be reporting on. Are these companies respecting their agreements that they're supposed to be living up to?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. I mean, at the end of the day, the media can just point out that it's happening. We can't do much more than that. And I think the Indonesian reporters have been extremely brave in doing that. I know of at least 2 Indonesian reporters who have got killed by illegal loggers in recent years. I know of at least half a dozen more Indonesian reporters who have been imprisoned by Aceh provincial officials, and it took us a huge effort to get them released. So I think environmental journalists in Indonesia are not only doing their job, they're doing much more than their job, and they need a lot more support in these matters. We are, from the Journalism Network, from the various forums of environmental journalists, other journalists, we are always trying to help out, but we can do that. And they essentially, they're in the front line where they're actually getting shot and imprisoned. So and they're still doing it, so I think they're doing a great job.
James, if I can ask you that, so with the palm oil, and you've emphasized the work that you're doing with the local media, but the palm oil, it's a global issue. And can you just real quickly tell us, so what's the driver, the demand for this, and is Internews, are you taking advantage of this gloriously global network of journalists, and are you going to be working is this like an issue that you're going to be telling the whole supply chain story? Because I think I get that a lot when people come and talk about China, when a lot of it, even Ma Jun last week was saying, well, actually it's hate to say it, but it's you guys in some ways that our demand for cheap products is driving some of the water pollution in China. Can you tell us about that quick?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the global market for palm oil, palm oil is used in so many different food products and other kinds of products. So it is, global demand that is driving that expansion. What are we doing about it? I mean, I have to admit we haven't had a formal project on that. I mean, we've unfortunately never been funded for that. We do, through our informal networks and stuff, have discussions about this. But we're also facing limits on our resources as well. So actually, I think there might be prospects for doing more of that in the future. We're talking with some European funders, who some European governments are interested in this issue, and I'm hopeful that we'll be able to do more in the future. But so far, we haven't been able to do a lot.
But if you get, I mean, that's the challenge all the time. Once you get the funding, because you have the network to do it.
Yeah, exactly.
To do something with it.
Yeah.
Some other questions out here. I promised this side of the room that I'd be nice to them. Okay, they're kind of in the middle. Okay, Devin, why don't you, can you guys both ask your question? You ask one and then pass the mic, and we'll keep the dynamism here.
Yeah, this is Donald Barnes, Guangxi University. I'm curious to hear from all of you as to whether or not there are any principles of environmental reporting that apply across cultures and across different countries? Are there certain characteristics of environmental stories that would be a good story in the Philippines that would also be a good story in Indonesia? Or are all of these things fairly culture and regional specific?
Okay, maybe pass it to the nice guy to your right there. I'm assuming you're nice. And can you say your name? We'll just ask yours real quick.
Okay, I'm Philip Cho with CWeb, and people say we do PR for the ocean, but I'm putting an invite out to you guys, I guess, and James already knows about us. We're hosting a major conference on sustainable fisheries and aquaculture in Hong Kong in September, and my question was we've heard about logging and water issues, mostly freshwater, but I was very heartened by the Brahmaputra story, and the oceans is really a realm where these countries really share, and there's the whole supply chain issue as well, and was just interested in hearing more about public perception about that in your countries, because as we know here in North America, sort of the saltwater stuff perception came a lot later than terrestrial awareness. Thank you.
These questions there's a little slight overlap there in some ways. Okay.
Well, there are two archipelago nations.
Yeah, we're going with them first. Even though you guys do love fishing in China.
Yeah.
So who's going first? Why don't we take the sustainable fishery question, which actually in some ways we can flip it onto yours too. Yeah.
Yep. That is actually interesting for example, for the Philippines, because in the Philippines, only 5% of coral reefs are in good condition. So it affects our food chain, jobs, and of course the people living in these coastal communities. And on the question of if we have principles across culture, I think we shared the same problems on confronting these issues, on how to report it in a simple manner, on how to report it for ordinary people to understand technical issues, for example, on climate change, biodiversity, and other issues.
But in some ways, though, I could almost see that to link in their two questions, that the fishery issue, that how it can be reported, I mean, it's going to vary, like in China, there's been a challenge, the big issue of like the shark fin soup. And I mean, that it's hard to get traction and hard to get really, in China in particular.
I think food safety.
Food safety, yeah.
It's relevant.
It's relevant. I mean, shark fin's not food safety, but in terms of, if you, finding the right angle in China is the food safety and that's
a big issue in China.
Yeah. But it's going to be different because in the Philippines, because they see that the communities see that they're unable to catch fish because the waters are dead. So slightly different angle, but I think that but in China too, the government's not overly interested in the global fishery issue, because it's a bit sensitive. Your fishers are going way far out. It's
yeah. There's international conflict. Actually,
yeah, exactly.
Right? Mm-hmm. Between China and Southeast Asia countries. And, I'm not sure, but I think food safety is really angle for Chinese to understand how fishery is going, because there's a lot of scandal every day in China about safety. Talking about the rules or basic lines of environmental reporting, I honestly don't see cultural difference. I think accuracy, truth, balance or something, they are the same in the whole world. I mean, there must be different perspectives or angles, but I don't see different values in reporting environmental issues.
Yeah. Maybe going down, we have another for the sustainable fishery question to you, Adi?
Yes, I think our government, Indonesian government, have shifted the paradigm from marine exploration to conservation. We can see that we have more than 40 million hectares of marine areas that decided as marine protected areas in Indonesia, and we have also, in terms of regional and international cooperation, we have a Coral Triangle Initiative. It consists of 4 countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Brunei to protect this richness biodiversity area. I think that's.
Yeah, I'll begin also with the fisheries issue. I mean, we're very interested in helping journalists cover fisheries, ocean issues, marine issues, and we've been somewhat active in it. Again, the funding's been a little bit inconsistent. We've done coastal resource training for journalists in Vietnam, in Indonesia. We've done a lot, and in Burma, in Myanmar. More recently, we've been working a lot in Europe because they're undergoing the reform. They're trying to undergo reforms of the common fisheries policy. So we did a regional conference last year. We brought in journalists from all around the continent to discuss reform efforts, and we're going to be doing that again, specifically in France and Germany, and with help in some case from CWeb as well. So thank you again for your support. And we're also hoping to bring journalists to the Seafood Summit, and yeah, so we're already talking about that. So it's definitely a key topic we think is important and needs to be focused on. As for universal principles, I mean, that's a great question, and I agree with the other panelists. It's surprising how universal the principles are, and wherever we go, we find journalists who are interested in these issues, and there's a general dedication to making stories science-based, factually supported. There's an understanding of the broad sweep of these issues and the need to get the facts right. And what we found is that often these journalists are quite isolated, because usually you may be the one journalist at your media house that is focused on these issues. And I wasn't, when I was a journalist at my newspaper in Thailand, I wasn't the only one, but still you felt isolated. And so that's why creating this community has been, I think, just so wonderful, because it really is a way to get in touch directly with other journalists around the world who are often facing the very same challenges, the same issues. And there are tensions that are felt, again, universally, and that's that we could have a long discussion on advocacy. Do some journalists end up putting their own opinions into stories? Mm-hmm. My own opinion is, we should be very careful about that, and we tend to tend to dissuade journalists from doing that. But there are avenues to do that. There are columnists. So that is a long-running debate, and it's probably never going to be resolved, but it is an interesting one, and again, I think it's a universal debate.
Okay, some other questions out there? Oh, right here, Devin, right next to you.
Hi, my name is Jenna DiPaolo. I'm from the Rights and Resources Initiative. We're a relatively new player in this scene, a global coalition of nonprofits working on secure land rights for local communities and indigenous peoples around the world. And one of the problems that we're having is making sure that our research, particularly research that's solutions-based rather than, hammering away at the problems, isn't reaching the right audiences or the audiences that can benefit the most from that information. And one example that I'll give is we released findings that when land rights are secure, there's biodiversity benefits, there's poverty alleviation, in some cases reforestation, in others a decrease in deforestation. And that got a little bit of pickup in the UK, a little in the US. I think we had one hit somewhere in Sweden, and that's not the audience that we're trying to reach with this kind of more solutions-based information. So how can we connect our organization and our information with your networks is the question at the end of that. Thank you.
And I bet a lot of environmental NGOs would love to know the answer. So,
well, we are usually very scared of letting green groups use our list service, because then we'll get completely overwhelmed, A, and B, we would get turned into an advocacy organization. We're a professional group. We're not an advocacy organization. But I think if there are interesting stories to be told, then the information can be shared. Our listservs do have journalists from all over the world, and we do have specific listservs for specific regions. The Asia, Africa group is a separate group. So these listservs exist. So that would be a good way of getting the thing out. But as I said, I'm not going to commit that we'll run a press release. We will probably not, for the reason I just explained. Because then we turn ourselves from a professional organization to an advocacy group. But maybe we would run an announcement that such a press release exists at such and such website URL. We could do that, maybe.
Yeah.
I would just add, obviously, as Joydeep said, we get inundated with press releases, and it's overwhelming sometimes, and it's all very interesting stuff, and we welcome all the information, but how do we process it and turn it? And I would encourage groups, if you really want to get your message out, turn it into stories.
That's what I was going.
Yeah, turn it into stories. We don't want press release. We want stories. You work, for instance, I know RI, you work with fascinating people, indigenous people who have great stories. Find a way to get them to tell the story, and the journalists will come running to you to meet those people and to report on them. And actually, this is in reference to the earlier question about the universal principles of journalism. That is one of our principles. We are trying to turn these global issues into local stories. That is a common challenge we all face. And to do that, we need to report on people and not just issues. Yeah.
If I can give dare I say, I'm like as the only non-journalist up here. But again, I partner with the Circle of Blue, a pretty fabulous. It's an NGO, but it's made up of journalists, right? And these guys are professionals. And we went to China and did, in 10 provinces, looked at how energy development is impacting water, and so multimedia. We had infographics. We got Wilson Center. We can get data. I gave them lots of context, and they told. I love these guys. I mean, I know now you got to tell a good story. But then we took this story on the road. We did a road show, 17 presentations in 3 cities in 2 weeks, right? Talked to government, NGO, business, and researchers, and journalists, of course. And they loved it. Journalists, because they loved it, because we were asking a question and we were providing some answers that no one had ever thought of before in China. And that sounds very cocky to say that, but it's true. No one had really, the water folks don't talk to the energy folks, and we talked to both, and I'm going to be we're continuing this project, and I'm going to be doing my Wilson Center thing where I'm going to be doing a research group, hopefully finding more Ma Jun type folks. Definitely I'm going to have journalists on my group. But trying to, again, we'll be doing more reporting, and I do convening, and we tell stories. And that's what, and then the journalists, you guys, and then you let them go to, and it's the stories and the good questions. So, sorry, had to be shamelessly self-advertising, but it does work. It is expensive, though. I have to, the post-production stuff and, doing this kind of field work, but totally worth it. And even like he said, pick 1 or 2 of your good stories, and there are other organizations that can do this kind of multimedia stuff to help you out. All right, some other questions out here. We've got one right up front. Friend of a panelist I know.
Hi, I'm Nadine Hoffman with the International Women's Media Foundation, and we're working with Imelda to put together a new fellowship for environmental reporters in the Philippines. But I'm curious if I could hear a little bit more from each of you about where these environmental issues actually fit into the overall news agenda of the major media outlets in your country. For instance, is it hard to sell your editors on these kinds of stories? Are these stories getting, prominently featured, or are they getting buried? And are there ways that you think you could increase, if you could make them, more prominently featured in the news agenda? What are your recommendations from your own experiences?
Great question.
Andy?
Anyone?
Andy, you want to go first?
I can do first.
Yeah, listen.
We'll just go in order. We'll go down the line here.
Okay. Well, it's not easy, as you said, that editors or the chief editors do not usually see the environmental articles are very big, but some journalists say that they kind of intentionally to link environmental problems with other social problems. Like, environmental problem is not only about environment; it's about politics, business, money, and governance or something. So if there is some scandal about environment, about company, about government, it's a scandal. So it's not only a environmental reporting. So it can get a lot of attention. Actually, it can get a better section on the newspaper. It get a good position. If you only report from the environmental perspective, like the conservation of a natural park or something, I don't see the good opportunity to get a better position in terms of on your own media. But if you can make it relevant to the editors or to the chief editors, I think it will be better.
I totally agree with Likan. In developing our stories, you should put a human face always, put the people on the ground always in the stories. And in the case of the Philippines, environmental issues, climate change, especially disaster issues, they always land in the front page now than before because of the changing climate and what we are experiencing right now. So it really connects with everyday life of the people. So putting a human face in the stories is the best.
I keep telling both my students and my trainees that I do not like these labels of environmental journalist or health journalist or science journalist. I'm a reporter, a professional reporter. To me, a story has to stand on its news value or it falls. I will not do a story, nor will I accept a story on the environment because it's Earth Day. If I'm doing it because it's Earth Day, why am I not doing it because it's Donald Duck Day? I'll do it if there is a news value to that story. And basic news values don't change. And of course, you bring your science into it, you bring environmental issues into it, you bring gender is a very important part of it. And I know you are doing a lot of good work on this. But I think the story has to stand on its own feet or not be carried, period.
In my experience, the best way to sell the environmental story to my editor is in the form of features. So especially investigative features that become intend to investigative reporting or in-depth reporting. In case of Indonesia, we have a lot of environmental problems, and most of it is scandalous. Yeah. So our editor for example, in Tempo magazine or in National Geographic Indonesia, like the story the feature story, because it's more human interest. We can put the drama inside the story, so we can focus on one or two interest people in the story.
It is really hard to sell environment stories often, and so one of the things we do in our training sessions is try and work with journalists in how do you pitch your stories to your editors or your producers, and it's not easy, and but there are tricks out there that you can use, and although Joydeep may not publish a story because it's Earth Day, a lot of editors will, and we encourage, and not just Earth Day, but World Forest Day or International Oceans Month or Biodiversity Year or whatever. And so if you've got a hook like that, use it. We often recommend they use it. And but more substantively, we really encourage journalists to pursue stories from different angles. As Joydeep says, it's not just an environment story. All these stories are, they're business stories, they're political stories, they're international stories, they're science stories, health stories, food stories, travel stories. You can do so many different angles, and often that's a more appealing way to attract an audience.
There we go, right up front here.
Thanks. Hi, my name is Jen Salen, and I work with the American Bar Association Rule of Law Initiative. And we've been working in China actually for many, many years. That's the program I work on here from DC, in particular on environmental issues. And now that we're talking about the different dimensions of environmental stories, maybe we can talk about some of the legal dimensions of environmental stories, because this is clearly an area in China that's had a lot of traction around public interest litigation in the past few years. And so I don't want to kind of ask a closed question just about public interest litigation, which I'm very interested in.
Go for it.
And would like to hear from all of you about, but more about maybe the intersection of environmental journalism and the law, and how that, the legal platform or the legal dimension is being focused on in your work. Thanks.
Okay, I'm not a journalist. I was, but many years ago. I read many articles about those environmental reporting from the legal angles, perspectives, actually. But the thing is that the public interest litigation is pretty new in China. There are not many cases. We are trying to get involved in one of those cases, but it takes time. In terms of reporting, I think that the serious journalists are always trying to find the advices from the legal experts to see whether it is legal or how we can improve the current policy and the laws in terms of address those problems. But I mean, it's not easy. It's extremely difficult, to amend or to revise or to get a new law passed, in a very short time. I mean, but they report it. And it's if they have the chance, I think they still report those kind of issues.
In the Philippines, it's really difficult to report this kind of issue. That's why we're trying to train more journalists and lawyers to come in and understand the law of writ of kalikasan, or what you call the writ of nature in our country, because of this very sensitive issues with the legal.
Well, it just shows the diversity of Asia, doesn't it? All over South Asia, I think public interest litigation has been the main form in which environmental activists have pushed governments into making laws to protect the environment. And in many ways, for decades, reporters and these lawyers, the green lawyers, have worked very closely together, not in the sense of preparing that stuff or the petition or anything of that sort, but the moment they file the petition, they come and tell us, because they know that once they file the petition, then we can report on it, because then it's officially public property, public knowledge. So this is a constant give and take between PIL lawyers, environmental groups, and environment journalists. That's been going on for decades, and it has had a lot of virtuous cycle effect. Yes.
Okay, in terms of journalism practices, I think we in ECAG are trying not to break any law in our activity, in any of activity like reporting or editing. But in terms of our relation with governments, I think Indonesian governments are welcome with our jobs. They never intend to sue us and bring us to the court for some article or environmental article or investigative reporting. And I think we are in Indonesia have a good experience with our government, with our society. In terms of
yes, some of Internews' earliest programs in China actually focused on legal reporting, and that included environmental law. And in fact, one of the workshops was where Zhang Ke, the journalist that Li Zhan mentioned, that's where he was trained in, I believe. Because that's, if you can teach journalists about the law, then they can, of course, report when the law is being broken, and that's you know a very basic idea. Often, of course, a lot of developing countries, not just China, have good laws on the books, but the problem is with enforcement, and that's where the media can be so helpful, actually. And when I was a journalist in Thailand in the 1990s, you know, that was the case that we were facing. Was the country had good laws, but they weren't being enforced, and in fact, the judges often didn't even understand basic environmental principles, so that they, you know, they wouldn't rule, you know, and they weren't really properly enforcing the law. And what I found was that the media was basically the court of last resort. I mean, that's where these issues, it was a public court. That's where these issues were played out and debated. And I don't think it was an ideal situation at all, but that was the case it was. I think it's getting better now. And I know, for instance, in Thailand, they've started, I believe, creating a green court system, basically a court system that focuses specifically on environmental laws. I think
China has a handful, and in fact, Vermont Law School, who I work with, has been working to build the capacity of. There are about 6 or so environmental courts, but the ironic thing is that they're not getting cases yet. They're the All China Environment Federation, GONGO. Right. Well, an NGO, used to be a government-organized NGO, is actually working on public interest. You know these guys. Do you work with them, I'm assuming? That they're trying to help some of these courts, you know, take on public interest cases. The irony is that China doesn't, you know, public interest law is somewhat vague, and so it's kind of like a grassroots effort to define it. But yeah, so it's kind of, they're like institutions in waiting.
It's a good idea. I think it's
idea.
a good idea. I think it's just going to take time.
Yeah, and most of them focus on water, you know. Yeah. So do we have any more questions out there? Because if we've tapped you all out, we could give you a chance to gently tackle the many not lawyers, the many journalists in the room. Sorry, we're talking lawyers. You confused me. Stop it. All right. If not, then can I have some applause here for these really amazing leaders in environmental? Well, even though you don't want to be called environmental journalists, you are a leader in environmental journalists. And keep in mind, we've got about 8 others in the audience. Anything else you wanted to say, James, there?
Thank you again. It's wonderful to be able to discuss these issues with you, and to have a chance for the journalists to tell you a bit about their work. I got into this business because they inspire me, and so I hope they do the same for you as well. Thank you.
Thanks again.